Hi everyone, this is Christina from Evilly Yours English Podcast. We wanted to provide you with a content warning before you listen to this week's episode. The following podcast will contain material that may be traumatizing or triggering to some audiences, including topics of suicide, self-harm, emotional and physical abuse. Please listen at your discretion. Thank you for listening to us.
Hi!
Hi! Look at that lipstick color today.
Thank you. It is ColourPop. It's Toast by ColourPop. Ooh.
Oh, it is toasty.
It's one
toasty.
of their new mattes. Since they just
someone
re-released.
placed an order.
I did, because they had a sale.
I have latte makeup on, which is the same. It's brown, so that's funny. We didn't plan that.
You know, we out here just doing our very best. Out here. Trying. Doing our best. So tired. But anyway.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, please.
I was going to say, I feel like being tired and doing the pre-work is good because like you're not sitting there with the density and the heaviness of the novel yet. You're just bracing yourself. So
100%. And
so what novel am I talking about?
Girl, you talk about The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I can't believe that it has taken either of us this long to read it. Mostly because, so sorry, I need to not swipe notifications away since I'm on my phone. Habits.
Oh.
Sorry, I just heard the email chime and I was just like, stop it. But coming back to The Bell Jar, again, it's been talked about so much. It's always referred to in so many ways, whether it's like, you know, just in general pop culture or even in like that English class that you liked maybe once. And it is just, again, I feel such a monumental book, or like it's been made out to be one, and so I'm glad that we're finally reading it.
The folks I knew like when I was in my late teens and 20s who read it was only other females, people who identify as females. Being almost done with it, I can see why, but also the people who were reading it kind of they felt like it spoke to them in many ways, and this we'll get into when we do our book club discussion. I think will be what is femininity and what is toxic masculinity. I think I don't know if I would have been really prepared to have that connection to my life and like look at it glaringly like bleeding on the table as I can now.
You know what's so funny that you mentioned that? For me, it was a lot of like mixed gender that told me that it was epic as hell. Like when I was coming into the city, I forget what day, but my Metro North conductor, he saw that I like whipped it out, and then he was like, "Ticket, please," and I said, "Ooh," and then he just goes, "Oh, you're reading The Bell Jar?" And I said, "Yeah, duh." And he was just like, "It's so good. I don't want to say anything else except that it's so good, because I don't want to ruin it for you." And I said, "Oh my God, thank you. I appreciate that. But if I see you, we'll talk, my guy."
That's such an interesting reaction to have, especially as a dude.
Yeah.
It feels like a rite of passage book for young women in metropolitan areas.
Yeah, but I can see how if you are someone who identifies as male and you have a lot of these similar like ideations, or even like a similar diagnosis to the one that Sylvia and her character, her protagonist, Esther, have, you know, I can see how that can kind of like expand itself upon it.
Yes.
And how it could be a connective thing. We have both been gatekeeping information from one another to kind of, I don't know, bring some spice into this information sesh, if you will. And so I am bringing forth Miss Plath's biography. And I wanted to talk about like why it's super important to bring in the author's biography. Yes, I know. Many teachers are like, "Oh my god, let's talk about this person." And like sometimes they being authors have genuinely interesting lives, but many of these authors will incorporate their lives into their writings. For example, like Shakespeare, I know I keep bringing up Shakespeare because that's my guy. He had, I believe it was, I haven't given this biography in a while, 3 kids, Hamnet, Juliet, and then I forget the other one. And Hamnet actually died, and here we are with a play called Hamlet. Coincidence?
Like Ham Let Me Die?
I mean, if that's what you think. I'm just saying. But yeah, so it was fun, at least whenever I was teaching my 9th graders. I love seeing you just cracking up at yourself. I can't stand you. I love you. They would always get a kick out of hearing little things like this and drawing their own conclusions. And they're just like, oh my God, that's so cool. And I'm like, I know, right? That's why I do things. Isn't that crazy? So I'm going to be putting on my English teacher hat, and we are going to be talking about Miss Plath. So I am going to try my best to make this. What's up? What's happening?
Oh, I also put on my English teacher hat, but mine has a feather in it.
Oh my God. No, my feather is in the form of the quill. So, like, you know, I would think that my English teacher hat is. I feel it would be a little more old timey than that. Like, I think it would resemble more of like that of a pirate hat, like that kind of like shape that it's like pointed here, but then like a triangle that sits upon my head.
Illuminati.
Sure.
Freemasons.
Exactly. That's it. That's it.
Good night. Okay, go. Please tell me about Miss Plath.
So Miss Plath, I was shocked to find out, died at the age of 30. Right, that was crazy. I know. And so she is known to be an American poet, novelist, and writer of short stories. And one of the major things that she developed throughout her life was her signature writing style of confessional poetry, which I have never heard of in my life until I started researching this. So confessional poetry came about in the late 1950s to the early 1960s. That's when it was big. Funny enough, that's when Miss Sylvia Plath was alive. And in addition to that, there were other poets that fell into this genre that also became her friends and mentors, which we'll hear more about later. But she was born in Boston, Massachusetts. Her father was a German man, and he was an entomologist and a biology professor at Boston University. So he's a smart man. And Aurelia, which was her mother, she is a second-generation American, and I believe they were from Austria, her family. So she didn't really have the greatest relationship with either parent, and it was to the point that I think it was called Letters Home. Yes, because background on this, I read all these notes like the day before or even prior, but I didn't start like collating the notes until like today. So, and work has been work. So I didn't get a chance to write that down, but in that particular one, she illustrates like what a terrible, like volatile relationship that she had with her mother. And then in the, I think it was poem called Daddy, she compares her dad to the Nazis. Cray cray.
That right. Tells us a lot.
Ridiculously. It also doesn't help that he's German. It seems to me that her grandfather was the one that she had like a better relationship with, primarily because just in the bell jar, she does mention a grandfather, and like it's very like good natured when she's like speaking about food and such. And he also worked at a country club in real life. I know. And he, again, to what I can tell, was a pretty good guy. And Her father died from foot amputation complications due to diabetes.
Gangrene.
I mean, also if you think, oh wait, no, she was like 8 at the time, so that would have been in
Like the
1940.
40s?
Yeah, it would have been 1940. So I guess like at around that time, there were more recipes that were coming out that were like wild.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Anyway, Miss Plath was a published poet by the age of 8. Cause she a boss like that. And she was published in the children's section of the Boston Herald. And she continued it like throughout her childhood and even into high school. She continued to be published, and she kept on like winning prizes for her writing as well as her art.
Very semi-autobiographical when we think about Esther. So I know I'm sure we'll get there.
Oh, girl. There's a bell jar section. Don't worry. So then by the time she gets to high school, she's actually published like nationally, which is a big fucking deal. Big fucking deal. Snaps all around. And so then the bulk of her writing, I would say, comes from her time in college to like basically her 30, when she's 30. Her 30. I'm doing great.
I mean, it's not your 30.
It's not my 30. It's her 30 indeed. So she's a smarty. She went to Smith College in 1950. So go off, queen. She was an excellent student, and she became an editor for the college's publication known as the Smith Review. And you tell me if this sounds familiar or something, okay? She was a guest editor in a publication that was in New York City, but it was disappointing.
Was she now?
She was also, very
disappointing. Where Smith is located?
Massachusetts.
Yes.
Right? I was like, am I not mistaken?
And Esther is from Boston.
She is from Boston. So during this stint of her being a guest editor in New York City, it was disappointing for a few reasons. One of the reasons why it was disappointing was there was this poet that she admired named Dylan Thomas, that she was unable to meet him, even though there was a scheduled meeting. For some reason, she missed it. Also received a rejection from Harvard's writing seminar that I believe she applied to. And this was the first set of experiments with self-harm. And so by this point, she was diagnosed with clinical depression and was undergoing some electroconvulsion therapy. And for those of you that maybe don't know about ECT, it is used on patients with severe major depression or bipolar disorder. So essentially, there is a brief electrical stimulation of the brain while the patient is under anesthesia. It is typically administered by a team of trained medical professionals that include typically a psychiatrist, an anesthesiologist, and a nurse or a physician assistant. It is worth noting she being Sylvia, our girl, she did famously write about an outpatient shock treatment that she underwent, I believe, in 1953, where she was not given any muscle relaxers or sedatives. And it was something that was also, and typically ECT, at least back then, was typically used to subdue troubled or difficult women, and therefore was seen as a very punitive measure.
Of course, a hysteria remedy.
But a fact that I found out while I was doing this research, and that was mentioned in my research, so Sylvia Plath in 1953, she was admitted into Valley Head Hospital, and the reason why was because she, this was her first suicide attempt with sleeping pills. She survived, clearly, And she spent 6 months receiving intense psychiatric care, and she recovered, and she also graduated from Smith with honors. But the fact that I came across was this hospital was the same hospital that Jackie O, yes, JFK's wife, was treated in with ECT after a fight that she had with JFK when she was confronting his infidelity. That's what I learned.
Well, just another hysterical woman
I
confronting her
know.
man in 1960 about cheating.
Girl, say less. And so in 1955, she goes to university at Cambridge, aka Cambridge in the UK, baby. And she gets there because she wins a scholarship post graduation, and that's where she meets her husband, Ted Hughes, who is also a poet. And it's really cute. Like, they were in love. Like, they would write each other poems and shit. Like, it was just like how you would expect two artists to get together. So it's like hella cute. But I'm warning you, it doesn't stay hella cute. So just saying.
It's poetry, of course it doesn't.
Of course not. I'm just trying to manage our expectations here. I'm not trying to be a wet blanket. I'm just stating facts. And so I thought it was interesting because they met in February of 1956, and then they got married in June of 1956. And like, right, like same year, literally what, 4 months apart?
Choices.
Artist choices. And so like, again, like I love the idea of like a whirlwind romance. Again, the idea, because I do feel that sometimes it just becomes real reckless real quick.
Whirlwind is the hurricane, so
Here comes the hurricane. I'm sorry. I need Katrina anyway. Katrina. So in 1957, these two lovebirds, these two wedded lovebirds, moved back to the U.S. And Miss Sylvia Plath, she taught at Smith, her alma mater, which was great for a little bit, because her teaching left no room for her to write for pleasure. So she really wasn't getting much enjoyment out of teaching, since she couldn't really do what she really loves outside of that. And I can relate. So then it hurt. When I read that, I said, girl, same. So then they both moved to Boston, and she takes a job as a receptionist at a psych ward so that she can attend writing seminars with Robert Lowell, who again becomes her friend and mentor. And so that's when she started developing what became her signature writing style. And in addition, she picked up another bestie. Her name is Anne Sexton. I've always heard of her name, but never like had the pleasure of engaging in any of her works. So for anybody who is not an uncultured swine like me, she has written poetry, and also was in this confessional poetry. And two of the poems whose title stood out to me was titled Her Kind and Sylvia's Death. So to me, that says like, yo, that's my bestie right there. That hurt, which I appreciate. And so they both encourage Plath to draw from her personal experiences and to discuss, all of these uncomfortable topics, especially for like the 50s and the 60s. So she was very open to both of them about her depression and her suicide attempts, which also I think just shows the level of intimacy that she had with them, which is dope. We love to see people having friends that can be intimate.
For sure. And safe.
Yes, safety. And I'm not sure. I wasn't sure where to fit this particular quote from Miss Sylvia Plath. But it's regarding her diagnosis. And so, although she was diagnosed with clinical depression, essentially her symptoms track closer to bipolar disorder. And I don't think, again, you would know more than me, Christina, that like when maybe bipolar disorder came about as like a diagnosis. But I don't think that they had the proper phrasing for it of these symptoms until after Sylvia's death, or even like right around her death, maybe. But in one of her journal entries from 1958, she wrote, "It is as if my life were magically run by two electrical currents, joyous positive and despairing negative. Whichever is running at the moment dominates my life, flooding it." She specifically had manic depression, like in terms of the bipolar spectrum. So yeah, I wasn't sure where to fit that, but I fit it somewhere in between 1957 bullet points and 1959. So I was like, this works. On that continued note, she is further exploring her creative pursuits. Specifically, she goes to an artist colony in Saratoga Springs, where her writing got even darker, even weirder. And then she ends up getting pregnant with her daughter, I believe. And she and Ted, they settle in London for a little bit. And so, in 1960, she releases this collection of poems called Colossus and Other Poems, and it was published in the UK. And it was a big deal. Like, all these UK people were like, yo, Sylvia Plath is a baddie. Her voice, crazy. She has a mastery of imagery, and that wordplay is sick. And I feel like what I'm about to say next really reflects, even now, the comparison between like Europe and the US. Because this same collection was, wow, am I yelling? I'm so sorry. My AC was bumping. I'm so sorry.
You're just impassioned.
You're right.
By the female author. That's all.
You're right. You're right. And so this same book was released in the US in 1962. And critics said that her work was too derivative.
Derivative?
Derivative. That is what they said.
What was bumping in America in 1952? One of the best.
1952. 1962.
Oh, sorry. 1962.
Well, communism for one.
Yeah, we're terrified of
Red Scare,
the Russians. Yeah, McCarthyism, and we're about to go into Vietnam, like hardcore. Okay, so we've got top sellers. I need top sellers USA specifically.
Yes, USA. Hello, racism, civil rights.
We've got civil rights going on. So women, yeah. So her thought. This is what I was getting at before. Her thoughts didn't matter when she published this, at least not here. And that's why when I'm reading this, I'm like, well, again, we'll talk about this, but like, shook. Okay, Ship of Fools by Catherine Ann Porter. That's a female author. Was that really the name, or was that it's a Nazi allegory. Okay. A Shade of Difference. This is about world nations having Soviet issues. Dude, you're right. The fiction and stuff all were related to what Americans were going through.
See?
And women having mental health concerns was not an issue in 1962.
Correct. It wasn't the point, if you will.
It wasn't the point.
It wasn't the point. So, Bell Jar, all right? Bell Jar comes out in 1963. And it is semi-autobiographical. And although it is semi-autobiographical, her mom was trying to block its publication because of how close to Sylvia's life it actually is. So like they say semi, but lol, no. And so like this allowed her to explore her mental and emotional state, which we love. It also sheds some light to the idea of like women searching for their sense of self, searching for their independence as well. And she finished this particular work during a really rough time in her life. She was pregnant, suffered a miscarriage from that pregnancy. Then she became pregnant again. And remember when I said Ted is garbage? So she finds out that Ted fell in love with another woman who was also, it gets messy. This woman is married to this other dude and they are renting from the Plaths, basically.
Not the neighbor.
The neighbor.
The
Messy.
tenant. The tenant.
The tenant. Messica Simpson over here. Messica Simpson has this affair and it led to their ultimate separation. You'd think that it stopped there with Ted being garbage. No, it does not. Because we get some more information in regards to like to him post death. You'll see. Anyway, so Sylvia began writing another novel, actually. And it was called Double Exposure. She actually wrote 130 pages of it. And somehow this manuscript vanished after she died.
Whoa.
Vanished. And there are some theories revolving around this. Could have been destroyed. It's hidden or placed in the care of, someone. Or it could deadass just be lost. So who the hell knows? This other novel was titled Ariel, which was published posthumously 2 years after her death specifically. And this cemented her fame because it fully embraced confessional poetry, and it was her most personal but also most devastating work ever. Right. So although Bell Jar is like, the one that almost everyone knows about, I feel, this one is really just like, this is Plath. I know I kind of got ahead of myself. I should have discussed her death first. She continued to struggle with depression and suicidal thoughts. She had very long depressive episodes, which caused serious insomnia, a loss of 20 pounds, and she was prescribed an antidepressant and a live-in nurse. And essentially, what led to her death was a suicide. She was found dead by the live-in nurse after the live-in nurse asked a workman to help her get into the house because it was locked. And she died due to inhaling gas from her stove oven. Yeah. And so Hughes, her ex-husband was distraught, but he was handling things very, very shadily. And so he was in charge of all of her estate and papers because he was her ex-husband.
She's a woman.
That too. And so he really prevented a lot of her journals from being found or even published for that matter. Like he would publish some of those journals, but he would purposefully redact portions that involved him. Sus as hell. So, whatchamacallit? As a result of that, fans would deface Sylvia Plath's tombstone because it said Sylvia Plath Hughes, so they would deface it to chisel his name off.
Ugh. It's amazing we uncovered this much information about her, including the fact that 130-page manuscript went missing with all of his efforts to suppress her, even posthumously. So,
just in 1998, he does publish something regarding their relationship.
I'm sorry, did you say 1998?
Correct.
Like, as old as we are now, that much time has passed between her passing and this publication.
I would
30 plus
say
years?
this was probably published when NSYNC's first song came out, maybe. Actually, I think that was published in 1997. So NSYNC is a year old by the time Ted releases something. And even then, it reveals more about their relationship, but not very much. He dies shortly after this publication, and shortly after his death, I believe those journals that he did publish that had those sections redacted, they were republished with all the tea.
Thank goodness.
I know, right? A lot of this newfound information is in this biography written by Heather Clark. It's called Red Comet, The Short Life and Blazing Art of Sylvia Plath. In this, she mentions like the maternal line of Sylvia's family, and how many of the women on that side of the family had some sort of component of depression, hospitalization, or even suicide, to the point that there were letters that were exchanged, I think, between Sylvia's aunt and Sylvia's mom about grandma. And Sylvia did not know that grandma died in an asylum. Right. And so another thing to note is that during this time, a lot of what we now know about psychology wasn't known then. And really, or even invented for that matter, in terms of medications. So a lot of what was prescribed to Plath, it said in this particular book that a lot of that combination could have also like worsened her condition, because she had like a cocktail of drugs. There was like codeine in there, some sleeping pills, and antidepressant, and just a lot of different things that
when you get pharmaceuticals, there's a warning strip. Yeah, there weren't on any of these. It was, here you go, take all of this at once, and let me e-stim your brain so you have a mini seizure and undo what's going on with you. Let's go.
I let's do it. Why not? And you know, it's interesting, at least just kind of, I think I told you to watch it. I think it's called Nurse Ratched or something.
Cuckoo's Nest Nurse.
Yes. What's her face from American Horror Stories is in it, in the Netflix show. And granted, it's a dramatization, it's fictional, but I think a lot of what is covered in there is also rooted in some fact, because it also takes place in the 50s and 60s, or rather it's set there. And I'm just saying it's worth your time. That's all I'm going to say. But I also find very interesting that there are two very polar opposite views of Sylvia Plath. Feminists, they're like, oh, Plath is, driven by this madness, from like a domineering father, an unfaithful husband, and also, the demands of motherhood. Like, all this made her into a genius. But then other critics argue that her poetry in some ways is rooted in cynicism, ego absorption, and provides a fascination with suicide. So I find it very interesting, just the polar opposites of this like view of Plath. And another part of me, low-key, at least thinking about like Barbie, for example, I wonder how many of those other critics are not female identifying. So that's all I'm going to say. That is all I'm going to say. And that's all I have on Sylvia Plath.
Another one undone by the patriarchy. So actually, I had open a tab about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was why I gasped when you said Nurse Ratched. Because I wasn't sure what year it was published, and sure enough, it was 1963. But I was going to bring this up after.
That's great.
I was going to talk about, there are a lot of books from this period of time that talk about, in this case, it's like historical fiction. What psychiatric institutions, sanatoriums were like, and kind of some of the things people experienced. And, is it much better today is really the question. And is it good? So, we're going to have to question everything. But anyway, 1963.
Big year in mental health.
Big year of lobotomies and electrically stimulating the brain. Unregulated. Charming.
I love that.
I think, in school, right when we always had to get into a new book, like you had to read or do some research on like a lesson on who the author was. And I feel like a lot of my classmates would find it boring, like who cares? Similarly, like why do we need to know the history of antibiotics? Why do we need to know the history of like how we got to cognitive behavioral therapy instead of eSTEM? And it's because you need to know the evolution and pathology of things. So in this case, learning about the author supports you in learning about the setting for the book you're reading and the characters and what goes on and what is the author's network of understanding and what are they trying to convey to you. And that's particularly important with Plath because you said confessional fiction. What is it called?
Confessional poetry.
So obviously the Bell Jar is a book, not a poem.
Correct.
Her poetry books, I think she wrote sonnets or something. Mostly sonnets. I actually read The Colossus, and that one is a sonnet.
Oh, fire.
But not the whole thing, just The Colossus. This confessional style semi-autobiographical writing, there is a French term for it, actually, and this is just one of 3 words of the month, I guess. So it's roman à clef, which is French for novel with a key. Do you hear that?
I do. What the hell is that?
I live in construction world, so like someone's getting that OT. Roman à clef. So French for a novel with a key, and that means it's a novel about real life events overlaid with a facade of fiction. So these confessional introspective style of this book reminded me a lot of you hate Catcher in the Rye, right? But it reminds me of it. But that's pure fiction. There's never been a correlation made to Holden and J.D. Salinger being like the same person. Similar to Cuckoo's Nest is like historical fiction. It's about a period of time where folks in psychiatric institutions had no rights, right? So it's kind of like an expose, sort of telling a story, but also has that you questioning like, was this really what it was like? And sure enough, like if you read nonfiction accounts from the 60s or later, they get unpacked, and you can see how real those experiences were for the people in that novel. But for Plath, we have this story of Esther Greenwood, who is her, basically. And she changes all the names of the people and the places except for the cities. She still is going back to Boston. She's still in New York City for this magazine internship. Everything is described to a T, like the small women's liberal arts college she attends. That is historically and always will be Smith College. So I just thought that was interesting. There's really a term for that.
I love that. And may I be the one to say, that's a French-ass word.
Roman. Working on that R, yeah.
My little croissant.
So we'll have these all, on our gram, so you could see the spelling and stuff or whatever. But so that was one thing, and that's a nice little connection to your recap of this woman's life. Short, but what's the word I'm looking for? What was the quote from the biographer? Her short but something life, like she was a trailblazer, basically.
The short life and blazing art.
So I think part of the reason the art is blazing and could upset people who are men is because it is a true, honest confession from
Mm-hmm.
a woman living in a time where it was not really okay to be a woman, which is most of history.
Oh, girl. Even now, with how laws are going.
Mm. So, so Claudia, while we were reading,
Yes.
I know the people wanted word of the week, word of the month to come back.
Me
So
too.
popular demand. Here we are. When we do these pre-works, we can talk a little bit about some of the words we're finding as we read, what they mean, what frustrates us, or just fun facts. And again, exercising the etymology muscles of your brain. So maybe when you see these roots and affixes in the future, you can dissect a word on your own.
Oh
So
my
speaking
God.
of dissection,
Yes, let's go.
the two words I want to talk about today, one of them can be dissected by medical professionals, and that is a cadaver.
Hell yeah.
It comes up because Esther in the story, her male, I don't know what do you call the guy courting her is in medical school, so at one point she goes to see him dissect cadaver.
A suitor.
Her suitor buddy.
Why is that his name?
I don't know, but like I call my dog Buddy in the street, and it just makes me so upset to read Buddy in the book. Yeah. So cadaver, synonyms include corpse, dead body, right? Okay. Now, did you know it has common roots with the word decadence, as in that ice cream sundae, as in Jay Gatsby's parties, as in luxury, or so that's kind of what we think when we hear the word decadent, right? Or the state of decadence.
Okay.
Claudia, what do you think before I explain?
Okay. You want me to put my bullshit degree to
Let's hear
use?
it.
So
what's the relationship?
I'm on the dock, but I haven't looked past cadaver and decadence. That's all I saw. Like the caps. Okay. So I would think that it's rooted in the history of obtaining cadavers for autopsies. Hear me out. Okay. It's going to sound real weird. Just hear me out. So at one point, I believe it was in the 1700s or 1600s, it was a real bitch and a half to perform autopsies on cadavers. And so I think it would be a form of luxury or decadence to have one in order to learn about the human body. And so because of that, people had to snatch bodies from graves. The end.
The internal screaming.
You're welcome.
So, wow.
Or does it have to do with the smell?
Ew.
I'm not saying that it would be decadent. I'm just saying.
So your first explanation was not far from the derivatives. It isn't. There is no. I mean, at least not in my journeys. The historical correlation you made there is not there, but the word root brought them from a similar place to where they are now. So your story, your process was there, along with apparently English users, other English users historically. So decadence, the official definition, is the state of being degenerate in mental or moral qualities. Isn't that funny that we both think that's luxury? Moral or cultural decline is characterized by excessive indulgence in pleasure or luxurious things.
Oh.
So the idea of, so this is very Catholic.
Yeah.
Or just whatever, conservative.
It's giving gluttony.
Yeah, decadence is gluttony. Oh, thank you. I don't think of the 7 sins ever. That's exactly.
Aren't you glad that you have an ex-Catholic over here? Like, you're welcome.
Yeah, so gluttony being one of the 7 sins, decadence, luxury is sinful, right? So, let's get there. Despite, Roman parties, we're talking about Roman roots in a second. So, etymology is the root of the word itself, decadence, appeared for the first time in the 1540s, medieval. So that makes sense. That was a very religious time in history. Maybe not Catholic, sometimes Catholic, but mostly just Christian in general. It was Protestant v Catholic. 1540s, and it specifically referred to things that were in deteriorated condition or decay, coming from French décadence, which comes from the Latin decadentum, which is decaying.
Hot.
So if you break down that word, right, so we've got D-E-C-A-D-E-N-T-M, decadentum. So D-E is a prefix. So we're going to cut that off. That D means like down or take apart, take away. And cadere means to fall. So you fall away from your morals when you engage in, you know, that ice cream sundae or a Gatsby party, I think we all understand that to be a decadent affair.
Indeed.
Immoral,
all the debauchery.
All the debauchery, right? So cadaver, the current understanding is a corpse. That comes from Latin cadaver, which meant dead body of men or animals. Likely
only of men.
Yeah, just men, not women, not anything else. So the Latin cadere, again, means to fall, and that's where that comes from. In this case, this one, it's not funny, but just like so morbid. It's the idea that like when you are no longer, when you're unalive, you fall down, like, and that's it. It's the final downfall. Like, so in one sense, it's more metaphorical, falling away from your morals, and in the cadaver sense, it's literally falling into the 6 feet under. All that to say, I found that those two words stuck out to me, and also it was so interesting that they have the same root verb, to fall. And this book is about a woman's descent or fall into depression and a mental health bout. So yeah, get ready, get your empathy shoes on.
Damn right. Get it up.
We're gonna walk. We're gonna walk in someone's shoes next time you listen to this channel as we explore.
Breathing. Funny that you should make word of the month, WOM, cadaver, because I just read that scene.
Oh, I'm so glad that you did, because
I would have been like,
I wasn't thinking about that at all. We spent the most of today really talking about the author herself, and I think it's important we're spotlighting her as a pioneering, trailblazing female author who had a lot to say about things people didn't want to hear. And I think, you know, when you're watching a movie, you're Googling those celebrities, aren't you? Everyone.
Me? Always. Oh, 100%.
Not you. I'm talking to the people.
When I'm at home.
Girl, I know it. I see you doing it.
like I do it right next to you. Not in the movie theater, though, because I have respect.
No. Yeah. We just do it after the movie. But like,
yes.
We'll be sitting watching something, and I just look over, and she's like, "Oh, did you know so-and-so was also on this soundtrack?" Trivia. But it helps you immerse into that world and understand the people in it.
Also, sometimes, at least in that respect, you notice trends in people and like roles that they take sometimes. Or I'm trying to think.
Not Timothée Chalamet.
Don't get me started. Don't.
I saw the trend until Wonka, and then I gave up and quit.
Just the trends and the motifs in like the characters that actors choose to portray. So I like doing that. That's why I do what I do.
Yeah. And also, you know, if you look up an author or an illustrator that you like, you can find more things by them.
Yeah. Also, Tim Burton. He is like the king of motif. Oh, like, sure. Looking at his actual like illustrations, he has a distinct style. There is no arguing about that.
Facts. In poetry and the story and story structure and in art, all of it is clearly trademarked, and I think it's fun to unpack that with the people creating things that you love.
Damn right. So
yep, so just Google it, research your authors. That's what I wanted to title this episode.
Oh, I already did that.
What did you title it?
Brown
Oh, I
makeup
see.
hues, blazing confessions, and little croissants.
Oh, little croissants. Wait, where are the little croissants?
Oh, because of the French ass word.
Oh my god, that's a stretch. I have a little croissant right here, but I don't know if you can see it. Let's see if I have to cut this.
Let's see. Oh my god, little croissants! Inaudible screeches.
Little croissant.
I mean, we could also change it to brown makeup hues, blazing confessions, and French ass words.
And French ass words.
It will clearly get cut down, and that's fine.
Subtitle, research your author. Pay them the respect. They put in the work to give something to you. They wanted to share a message with you. And I think the message that we're going to discuss in this novel are going to be well worth you spending some time getting to know Miss Plath. So that's what I have to say.
Damn right, and I second that notion. Aye. And on that note, as always, these pod notes will be available via Google Doc on our linked tree. And I'm going to tell you where you can find us. You can find us on YouTube at Evilly Yours English. Insta, TikTok, Spotify, all evilly.yours.english. And guess what, y'all? I mean, we've been telling you since the start, but okay, Wolfie. He's telling you where we're at. Let me translate because I speak fluent Wolfie. Oh, he said that we're also on iHeartRadio. Apple Podcasts. Damn. I guess I'll finish his sentence.
Thanks, because wow.
Amazon Music. I think he said that at the start, but like he was doing it continuously.
A little unintelligible, yeah.
I got you. So thanks, Wolfie. I love that you helped us out in telling the people where they can find us. And next time, we will be discussing this book, The Bell Jar, with a special guest. Probably. And yeah, what?
Probably. Most likely. It's been
Most
planned.
likely.
We'll see what happens. This person is 6 hours ahead of us, so we'll find out.
And he's a busy guy, too, so who knows? So that is the plan. We'll see what life brings us at that point. On that note, bye!
Thanks for joining! See you!
Bye!
Bye!